So I'll get right into it. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Most of the people here know that I am an ultra runner, quite accomplished, and I'm one of 9 people in the United States who have run 100 miles in under 13 hours. I'm on the top 10 list. I worked very, very hard to get there. I'm very proud of that achievement. I was the 5th American at the New York City Marathon in 2011. I've won many prestigious 100-mile ultra running events. I've completed the Spartathlon in Greece, which is considered one of the most difficult ultramarathon events in the world. It's 153 miles. I've also completed the Badwater ultramarathon. I've won many, many marathons, including the Yonkers Marathon, which is the second oldest marathon in the world. Very proud of that. And I've also been a fruitarian for almost 6 years. So diet is extremely important to me, and it's one of the secrets to my success. So I feel like I have quite a bit of experience. If there's anything that I feel like I know well in the world or in anything in life, it's running and all things related to running. One thing I want to give a shout out to Indigene Socks. They are sponsoring us. I think we have about 80 pairs, so everybody here is going to hopefully get one pair of these. And we also have Nathan Sports, which makes all kinds of water and hydration bottles. They're also giving us a lot of giveaways, so you guys will get some of that too. But there's not enough to go around for everybody, but I just want to... And although I like to think that I'm a minimalist, Indigene Socks have been really a benefit for me. They definitely are something I highly recommend, not just because they want to sponsor us, but because they keep my toes nice and blister-free. And Nathan makes fantastic equipment, very high-quality products. I really do believe in the company and what they do. One of the things that, that most people fail to recognize is in order to consider running 50 miles or 100 kilometers or 100 miles or even a 5K is breaking down your running to what I call the lowest common denominator. And for me, that's the mile. Starting at the mile and how well you can run a single mile is extremely important. You've got trainers and coaches out there, and they'll give you all kinds of training programs based on trying to perform well at various distances. And I feel that after a lot of personal experience, if I was ever going to go back into running, I would focus all my attention on the singular mile. Because pretty much everything beyond the mile is going to be based on what you can do at the mile. So if you've never really trained hard to run your best mile and you run a 5K and you're kind of wondering what could you run a half marathon or a marathon at, you need to go backwards. You don't want to build up to the 10K or the half marathon. You want to go backwards. It's a big thing for me. Go back to the mile. It's a critical thing. And I'll tell you a quick story that's kind of funny and why I think we should look at the mile more as the base of all other distances. I did a 12-hour run about 5 or 6 years ago. A 12-hour run it was a loop course. It was a 1-mile loop, and everybody runs for 12 hours, and whoever runs the most miles in those 12 hours wins. And I met a guy at the race who didn't seem like he knew much about running. He didn't really have things set up for aid for himself. He didn't seem to have really good running gear or shoes or even clothing. He was running in basketball shorts. And I asked him, I said, what are you doing here? It doesn't look like you're really a runner. He goes, well, I read this book called Born to Run. And it just fascinated me, and I want to see what I can do. And I said, well, have you run before? He goes, no, this is my first race. And I said, are you really kidding me? I said, you jumping into a 12-hour run and you've never even done like a 5K? He goes, no, man, I want to do the long stuff. And this was like, about 2 hours into this thing, and I could see he was really struggling. And about 10 hours into this race, I think I was somewhere in, 60 miles or something into it. I was pushing hard, and this guy was a mess. I mean, he was walking like this, and he was still going. And I ran past him, and I said, I go, born to run, huh? He didn't laugh too much. He just, but he just kept dragging along. And I felt sorry for the guy, and I actually got his information, or my wife got friendly with him after the race, and she stayed in touch with him on Facebook. And as I know of today, he still hasn't run a race since. So it's important to realize you get these numbers in your mind. You hear about people running 100-mile races, and it seems awesome. you got to go back to the lowest common denominator. If you want to be a successful runner, start at the mile. And I'm going to give you some information about the mile. Why is the mile important? Well, a mile is a perfect blend of all the things that go into all other distances above the mile. You got your leg speed, you've got your endurance, you've got your stamina, and you've got the mental and emotional component all in that one distance. And what you do, another great thing about the mile is you don't have to put a lot of time into training for the mile. If you want to try to train for a half marathon or a marathon, it's a huge commitment. Most people don't ever give themselves the training and the time to really see what their peak potential is. But you can peak in the mile with relatively very little training per week. I recommend people that want to train for the mile can do it in less than 2 hours a week total, and still run a very high quality mile PR. So the mile, it proves what your oxygen transport carrying potential is, how well you can clean out lactic acid from your muscles, and also, again, your mental focus, your tolerance for pain, which becomes really important in these other distances. So if you can run a mile at a peak level, and I think that takes time to get to that peak level, you can determine all your other performance levels at all other distances. I know that based on my mile time, I can do X amount of miles in 24 hours. And then I can do, from there I can break it down to what I can run 100 miles in, what I can run 100K, what I can run 50 miles in, the marathon, the half marathon, all the way down to the 5-kilometer distance. And the formulas aren't a secret. They're not something that I came up with. These things are readily available on lots of different, let's say, very credible websites. Jeff Galloway is a fantastic runner. He's a former Olympian. He has a very good predictor formula on his website. There's something called the Mcmillan Formula, which is well known. And on letsrun.com is the highest quality website that I can recommend related to anything running. And people there that know running and study running will agree that based on your mile time, you will be able to run all other distances or predict what those distances are. So I'm going to go over some elite runners, and I'm going to tell you about what their mile times are, and then I'm going to tell you what they were able to do at all other distances, and it's held true for me as well. Haile Gebrselassie, he's arguably the greatest runner of all time. Pound for pound, this guy is just, I just got the chills. Understanding what this guy has done is just incredible. He's Ethiopian. I think he's held more than 25 world records, and he's still running, and he's 40 years old. His mile time is approximately 3 minutes and 44 seconds, and that's based on his 1,500 meter record time. He never actually ran the mile competitively at a high level, but based on his 1,500 meter time, he's about 3:44. His 5-kilometer time, his average pace for 5 kilometers is 4 minutes and 4 seconds per mile average. So you're going to want to remember these numbers. Based on your peak performance in the mile, and this holds true at an elite level if you're really training hard, you add 20 seconds to your best mile time, and that's going to be your average for 5K. So Haile Gebrselassie has run 3:44 for the mile. For 5K, his average pace is 4:04. For 10 kilometers, these are all very standard distances. If you want to race, these are the distances you're going to be running a lot. For 10K, he's run 4 minutes and 15 seconds average per mile. So that's 30 seconds slower per mile average than his mile time. For the half marathon, he's added 45 seconds to his best mile time, which was 4 minutes and 30 seconds per mile for 13.1 miles, which is incredible. For the marathon, he was the world record holder up until just not too long ago. And he is his marathon best average mile time is 60 seconds slower than his best mile. So if you can run a mile in 3 minutes and 44 seconds, you're going to want to run the marathon in 4 minutes and 44 seconds average. So my personal times, my best mile in high school was 4 minutes and 36 seconds. And just about my 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon times have all been those slightly slower per mile averages. So again, I'm going to repeat this. You might want to write this down. For 5K, 20 seconds slower per mile. For 10K, 30 seconds slower per mile. For the half marathon, 45 seconds slower per mile. For the marathon, 1 minute slower per mile. And since we're talking about ultra running, and you can't find these formulas, this is going to be my opinion. For 50 miles, you want to run 1 minute and 45 seconds slower to 2 minutes slower. 1:45 to 2 minutes slower than your best mile time. So if you can run a mile in 5 minutes, if you want to run your best 50-mile time, you should be able to do it below 7-minute average. For the 100 kilometers, I believe it's 2 minutes slower than your best mile time. For 100 miles, I give it 3 minutes. So if you can run a mile in 5 minutes flat, you should be able to run 100 miles at 8-minute average. For 24 hours, I've got down 4 minutes to 4.5 minutes slower than your best mile. So ultra running is getting more popular for people that don't have super fast mile times. Because if your best mile, if you go on the track and you train hard for the mile and your best mile is only 7 minutes and 30 seconds, which is not that fast, you should be able to run 100 miles in 17 hours and 30 minutes, which in most races will put you very high up in the finishing results. For a 24-hour race, you're going to be able to, if your best mile was 7 minutes and 30 seconds, you add 4 minutes to that, you should be able to run 11 minutes and 30 second pace for 24 hours. If you're a woman, you're going to run 125 miles in 24 hours. That will put you in the top 5 national results. So if you're not a fast runner, you can still do really well with the ultra distances. And I think that's important to hold on to. So, specifically talking about mile training. I love the track, and I think that's the best place to really see what you can do. It's pretty simple. I believe that you should run 6 days a week, and I think 3 of those days should be easy, casual running. 3 miles on the track. Do 12 laps. Nice and comfortable, just so you're breathing normal, not stressing yourself out too much. 2 of those days, you want to do 400-meter repeats. That's 1 loop of the track, and the key here is to do it so when you get to the 10th repeat, you feel like you really don't want to do 2 more. And one thing that a lot of coaches argue about is how much rest you should put in between each 400-meter. I believe that you should give yourself no more than 45 seconds rest between each 400-meter lap repeat. So that would be 3 days easy. 1 of the days per week should be 400-meter repeats with not too much rest in between each repeat. And then 1 day you want to do 800-meter repeats. And I suggest doing 6 of those. And I believe you should not take more than 60 seconds rest in between each 800-meter. So depending on what your skill levels are, you can pace yourself. You want to be very tired after those hard workouts. And however fast your mile time gets after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, depending on what kind of fitness you're in, you should be able to add those times that I just went over for your 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, 50-mile times, and you should be able to say, okay, I should be able to run 100 miles in this amount of time if you do the training. But everything should start with the mile. Go back to the mile, guys. I can't stress that enough. So I'm going to give you what I've done for being successful at ultra distances. In my mind, the ultra distance kind of starts at 50 miles. 50K, 60K, 30 miles. It's still kind of a marathon in my mind. So for 50 miles, I suggest people focus on doing big, high mileage. I'm a big believer in big distance, and that means a lot of time. You want to be a great ultra runner, then you got to learn to suffer, and you got to learn to just get out there and put in the time, tons and tons of time. Tons of time doesn't necessarily mean tons of consecutive time. One of the best American ultra runners is a guy named Crowe Lowitz. He started doing this stuff back in the late 70s and early 80s. This guy's won more ultras than anybody, and he's kind of an unknown for most people. And Ray's somebody that's taught me a lot. He never ran more than 20 miles at a time in training. But sometimes he'd do triples in the same day. So he was doing, some days he'd run up to 60 miles in a day, but he would never run more than 20 miles at a time. And I tried to mimic that. In my training, I would run to work in the morning 15 miles, work all day, try to stay on my feet while I was at work, and then run home. And that made me extremely strong. So I can't stress enough, if you want to be successful at ultra running, you got to be committed to big mileage. I believe that anybody in the world of ultra running that's been extremely successful is running big mileage. Don't run too much at one time, but run a lot. I believe you need to run at least 120 miles a week to be successful at any distance, any ultra distance, which is going to be 50 miles or more. And then one thing that I don't want to talk about too much, but mileage, as you increase your mileage, you need to increase your sleep. That's a core component. I've talked about that in all my other lectures. One of the reasons why I was able to sustain 120 miles a week, most weeks I was running over 150 miles a week, is because I was doing 10 hours in bed a night. I'm just going to mention that quickly. I talked about it in my other lectures. You need to sleep. That's how you rest. Rest is not about running less. It's about sleeping. Sleeping is rest. I've run more than 180 miles in a week, and at this point in my career, I think running over 180 miles a week is probably not a good idea. I know some guys that run over 200 miles in a week. I wouldn't go above 150 to 160. I think that's kind of the sweet spot. If you want to run any ultra distance, even up to the 24-hour races, multi-days. I think above that, even if I'm sleeping a lot, I just can't recover to stay fresh. And then a lot of people that I've talked to think that I'm a lover of junk miles, or what they call junk miles, because most of my ultra running miles is pretty slow. And I don't like to call them junk miles, I like to call them base miles. And if you want to be a good ultra runner, you got to get used to running a lot. And you can't run that fast. You got to force yourself to run pretty slow. For me, the base miles should never be faster than 2 minutes slower than your current mile PR, your current mile PR time. So if I'm in shape to run a mile at 5 minutes, I am not going to do my base mileage any faster than 7-minute miles. I think it's really important to get patient with running slow and running a lot. It's a form of meditation, and you've got to accept that. You've got to embrace, a little bit of suffering and just accept it. It's a big part of not only the physical fitness, but also the emotional and mental fitness, and trying to be okay with being on your feet and moving for a very, very long period of time. So in terms of how much I run and when I run, I run 6 to 7 days a week. 4 or 5 of those days are going to be my base miles, or what some people call junk miles, where I run to work, easy, and I run home. And then 1 day a week, I'm doing big miles. I might do a Crowe Lowitz workout where I'll run 20 miles in the morning, 20 miles at lunch, and maybe 20 miles in the evening. My long days are usually 50 to 60 miles in that day. I believe personally that you want to be able to run 50 miles in training and be confident with that and be strong enough to handle that every week. So when I was doing my best running, once a week I was putting in a 50 to 60 mile run. And it did wonders for me. I'm not scared of 50-mile distance at all. To me, it feels like a regular run. And then the other core workout that I would do once a week would be a tempo. So even when I was training for 100-mile races or beyond that, I would still try to do a 5K to 10K tempo at least once a week to keep myself fresh, and I think that's very important. So you want to maintain that speed and that pain threshold. And I think it's a good idea to race once a week in those shorter distances instead of doing a tempo by yourself. I did a lot of 10K loops in Central Park when I was really doing my peak running, and it kept me on my toes, and I highly recommend racing to stay in shape. And that's pretty much how I trained to become the ultra runner that I became in the last 5 years. Big miles. It's not that complicated. Focus on the mile first, and then build from there.
What about hill training?
All right, so the question is hill training. If your goal is ultra running, and I guess you want to look at the type of race that you're going to be entering. So I'm a road runner. That's my specialty. I like the road. I like to run fast. I feel like trail or hill training running is almost a different sport. So what I'm talking about, running 150, 160 miles a week, that wouldn't apply to somebody that lives in Colorado at 8,000 feet. That would be way more training than what I'm doing on the road. So hill training, I wasn't a fan of hill training just because that wasn't my focus. It would be, I guess I'd have to adjust all the numbers and put it into hours. You know, I was running 25 to 30 hours a week. If you're going to move it to the mountains, do that and don't focus on the mileage number.
One more question, do you walk at all to run, like 10s and 1s?
The question is, do I walk? On the long days, the days where I would try to run 50 to 60 miles, if I felt like I needed to walk, I would take walking breaks for a few minutes, try not to get stuck on having to keep moving. But you want to be able to be in a place, fitness-wise, where you don't need to walk, and you want to build up to that.
So you run straight for 50 miles in races?
When I'm racing 50 miles, yes, I would not walk. Where do I put my foot when I'm hitting the ground? Am I a heel striker or forefoot striker? It's an interesting question. I have an opinion which some people might disagree with. I think trying to change your form is counterproductive in a lot of instances. I think if you try to become a forefoot runner or a chi runner, you could potentially create issues for yourself. I think, you know, it's funny, my training partner, when I'd see him running, I couldn't recognize his face at all. He might be, you know, a quarter mile away, but I could see his gait. I could recognize how this guy runs from far distance, and that's just how his style is. And I think it's important to embrace your biomechanics the way they are naturally, and not try to get too stuck on changing your form too much. I know people have tried to change their form. Some elite runners have focused on trying to change their form a lot or try to become forefoot strikers, and they've gotten injured. I think the most important thing in studying where you strike your foot is not where you strike your foot, whether it's the heel or the forefoot, it's where you weight the foot. Where do you put the load on your foot? There's elite runners that hit with their heel, there's elite runners that hit with their toes. But what's common throughout all those guys is when you study them in slow motion, they are weighting their foot. They're putting the weight load when it's directly under them. So, you know, there's a company called Newton. They make shoes where they put like a pad in the front, the forefoot, to kind of force you to weight to become more of a forefoot striker. It's a gimmick. Heel strikers, forefoot strikers, it's all about where you weight the foot. So if you're running slow and you find yourself kind of digging in with your heel, yeah, obviously you're probably a little bit overweight, or you're just getting started. But most people, as they run, will naturally weight the foot. It doesn't matter where you strike it, where they'll weight the foot when it's directly underneath them. And I think that just comes with time and practice. How much do I eat, and what's my caloric intake when I'm doing, let's say, 50 or 60 miles in a day as training? As a fruitarian, I eat low fat, and I eat lots of fruits and vegetables. So I'm really into the sugar thing. I think sugar is what you want, and when I'm training, I'm eating about 300 to 400 calories per hour. That's what I try to do. If I eat 500 calories an hour or 600 calories an hour, I don't think there's a bad reason to do that. If you want to eat more, I think it's fine. You just don't want to eat less than I try to hit 400 calories an hour. So the question is, you know, not during the run, but after I run, am I watching how many calories am I burning per day? So if I run for, 8 hours in a day and I do my calculations, so do I make sure I'm eating, let's say, 6,000 or 7,000 calories for the day? The answer is I don't watch my calories. I eat until I'm full. And that's pretty much it. And I think it's important to note that I'm eating high water content foods, and it's extremely important that you're going to the bathroom at least 10 times a day. You've got to flush your system out. If I could just pee all day long, I would do it. Because I'm just constantly cleaning out my system. So high water content fruits, fantastic. I can't recommend them highly enough. Do I do any cross training? And the answer is no. Running is pretty much all I'm doing because I'm running so much when I'm training for ultras.
What was your training like when you were training to run Badwater?
Question is, what was my training like when I was doing Badwater? I was running about 150 to 180 miles a week. I was trying to run in warm weather, and then during the race, the heat is the biggest issue there. It's just trying to keep ice on my head so I stayed cool. But for 100 miles or more, you just got to do big mileage and try not to run more than 20 miles at a time, but still keep the mileage real high. The question is, do I take any breaks throughout the year? Over the last 5 years where I was really going hardcore at ultra running, I really did not ever take a down season. There was virtually not a week that I ran less than 100 miles. I don't know if that's a good idea. I know Scott Jurek, he's told me that he takes off 1 to 2 months every year where he doesn't run at all. Maybe my career would be longer if I took more time off, but I enjoy running. And I think once you start becoming a high mileage runner, it becomes part of your lifestyle. I embrace it. It's something I do. It's something that it's just part of my everyday activity. I use my running not only to have a form of meditation, but also transportation. I can't tell you how good it felt to run to work. It took me 2 hours to get to work every morning. And then at the end of the day, I just hit the switch and I put my shoes on and I run home. Question is, do I have any particular fruits that I find my performance is better on? I'm a huge fan of oranges. I juiced a lot of oranges, ate a lot of oranges. Oranges are extremely high water content. They're fantastic. I lived on oranges for a huge part of my ultra running success. Question is, when I was building up to the ultra running, did I do stuff for injury prevention and related activities? I built up to, let's say, 160 to 180 mile average per week over, I'd say, 3-year period. I remember after I was running pretty seriously for about 2 years, I hit 100 miles one week, and that was a huge milestone. And then I remember when I got to 150 miles, and I kept thinking, wow, this is like really big mileage. And I think the biggest barrier for me was just building up slowly and mentally not letting it scare me too much. So I think most of us, when we get up to running on a consistent basis, we can really be in tune with our body. If I only was able to sleep 8 hours that night, I would take the train halfway home. I'd back off a little bit. You get very in tune with your body, but you want to run slow. I think if you're running slow, you're not going to really get injured as long as you're getting enough sleep and you're eating a fruitarian or fruit-based diet. That's my opinion. So I would just build up. If you're trashed and even though you're sleeping 10 hours a night, back off and build up. I didn't go from 0 to 150 miles a week in 1 year. It took time. Question is, what kind of food do I carry with me? When I first got into the fruit-based diet, fruitarianism, it was like a religion to me, and I wouldn't eat anything unless it was 100% raw, and I did dates. And out of convenience, mostly convenience, I do gels now, which is maltodextrin. They're easy to carry. I can carry 1,000 calories on me in my hands. I just need water. There's no fiber, so I'm not going to the bathroom that much. It works for me. I can't say that I had problems eating dates. Just logistically, it was difficult to carry them. And in ultras, I would go to the bathroom more than I wanted to. If you want to run 100 miles and you're worried about, your friends, family, social issues, people thinking you're totally nuts because you're also eating largely a diet of fruits and vegetables, I'd say don't think about other people. Everybody, I think, should run a 100-mile distance in their lifetime. And I just think that running 100 miles or walking 100 miles, moving consecutively for 100 miles is a spiritual event. And I think I just can't put words to it. Everybody should do that. I want every one of my kids at one time in their life to do a 100-mile distance. They don't have to do it in a race, but I think they should train and build their bodies up, build their minds up to be able to accomplish something like that. It's incredible. It's so empowering. It gives you so much confidence.
But did you encounter your family or any of your
I questioned my own sanity thinking I wanted to run 100 miles. 100 miles is 20 more miles than 80 miles. It's a really, really long distance. 100 miles still scare me. Question is, how do I manage time with doing all that running? You got to build it into your transportation. If I ever was moving somewhere where I had to work in a different location, I would try to live 2 hours away. 2 hours away. If you run slower, do you want 2 hours is a really good amount of time to run. The question is, do I ever do interval training or high intensity stuff? And the answer is yes. I was saying before, I still believe once a week you should try to do a 5K, 10K, or half marathon race. I wouldn't race more than a half marathon, but if you could do that once a week when you're in good shape, I think it's a great way to stay sharp. I was able to run a 100-mile distance at a high level, and I was also able to run a half marathon at a high level, all in the same week. Specifically related to ultra running, I don't recommend doing like high leg turnovers, super fast 30-second sprints. I don't personally find the benefit for ultra running. Question is, do I do any visual training or mental kind of like, trying to vision myself running or my training, and I'd say, yeah, I think I'm always thinking about running. When I got any kind of challenge, I think about running at night with a headlamp, and I'm just going to keep going. So it's in my consciousness all the time. And I think it helps, but the only way to get there is to get to that running all night with a headlamp. Well, I'll give you a quick story. I did not finish my first 2 attempts at the 100-mile distance. So as great as a runner as I became, I failed pretty badly at the first 2 attempts. I struggle with that. I like finishing things that I start. And it comes down to a mental training more than anything else in the ultras. You have to have this die-hard mindset where you're going to have confidence in your body and you're not going to give up unless you're really at a situation where you could create permanent damage to your body or potentially die.
What's your training like now, and also your running goals? Now that, as you said, you're kind of past your peak running days.
The question is, what are my goals now that I'm not running as much? I'll be 37 pretty soon. I was pretty much a full-time runner for over 7 years, and I was trying to do it at a very high level. I had a lot of goals outside of just personal performances. I was trying to set an example and create attention towards a fruit-based diet, and my family suffered a lot for it. Running 30 hours a week requires at least 70 hours of sleeping a week. So right now I'm retired from running. I run nothing even close to what I used to run, and I'm trying to focus on my wife and kids and trying to give back and let them have some dreams. So I'm not running that much right now. It's tough. It's very, it's a struggle for me. That's a good question. How much easier or more difficult is it to train with somebody or without somebody? I would say I probably don't appreciate how important it was to have a training partner. Maybe some of you guys remember or saw Oz Perlman, the magician who was here. He's my main training partner. He would meet me every day when I was running to the city to go to work. So I had a training partner, I would say 5 out of 7 days a week, and I think that made it much easier. So yeah, a training partner would be very important, but I know highly successful ultra runners that train alone. And there were a lot of times where I did train alone, and it was harder, but if you have the option to have somebody to train with, I would say seek them out. Go for it. Question is about shoes. I would run most of my miles when I was pushing for fast marathon times in racing flats, like marathon racing flats, light shoes under 8 ounces. In the last 2 years, I became a huge fan of Hoka's, which are extremely thick shoes, but are extremely soft, have tremendous amount of support. They're heavier, relatively speaking, but I became a huge fan of them. I think long term, if you're running in shoes that have a lot of cushioning, it's just going to allow your body to take less stress, and it's going to prolong your career. So I'm a big fan of Hoka's, and I'm not sponsored by them, but I believe in them a lot.
And how often did you get a new pair?
How often did I get a new pair of shoes? With the Hoka's, I'm running the same pair of shoes for 2.5 years. And I just put shoe glue on the bottom. They've got so much cushioning. So even though they cost about $160, $170, it's a huge value because I've got thousands of miles on them and they're still good. All right, if you don't have any more questions, I want to remind you, you want to focus on the mile. See how fast you can run a mile, and then you can replay this and add those seconds to the mile distance, and you're going to be able to know how fast you should be able to run all those other distances. If you think you want to run a marathon, you think you want to run 50 miles, you can figure it out real easy. Just go out there, train hard, do those 400-meter repeats with not too much rest. Put in 2 hours a week, get your mile time down, and then you could walk off the track and say, you know what, I could run 100 miles in this amount of time. And then you just got to put in the distance. You got to put in those base miles, put in the work. Let'sRun.com. Let'sRun.com. Phenomenal, phenomenal website. I'm not on Facebook, I'm on Let's Run.
What's your favorite ultra you ran?
Question is, what's my favorite ultra that I've run? They're all different. I'd say the one closest to my heart was probably the Spartathlon. It's 153 miles, and it's a very, very difficult race because they only give you 36 hours to finish it, which means you have to move. And I DNF'd my first attempt at it. So to finish the Spartathlon was really kind of my crowning achievement that I hold dear to my heart. That's really incredible. Other ones, I really like track running. Running 100 miles on a track is amazing. You can get so deep into just almost like a hypnotic state. It's almost like being on drugs or something. It's just incredible. So I really like track running. I like loops. Question is, do I do heart rate monitors or anything like that? No. I think if you're doing those base miles, if you're starting to build up over 100 miles a week, you get so in tune with your body. You know exactly what your hydration state is. You know exactly what your blood sugar rate is, and it takes years. It took me almost 8 years of training to run 100 miles under 13 hours. And I built on every one of my gains. So you got to have a lot of patience. Ultra running is a brutally unforgiving sport. But it's equally as fantastic.